This is the depiction of the planet in Sumerian that they say this extraterrestrial Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came from. They say it was a planet called Nibiru, which goes around, they say, through Jupiter and Mars, and then out well beyond Pluto, and takes about, Sitchin estimates, 3,600 years in its orbit. What they say in these texts, interestingly, is that hundreds of millions of years ago, in fact, 4,600 million years ago, this Nibiru planet came through between Mars and Jupiter, and some of its satellites had collided with a planet that was in that area, which they called Tiamat. And what they say happened was that the debris of Tiamat became what the Sumerian text called the Great Band Bracelet, what we call the asteroid belt. And where is the asteroid belt? It's between Mars and Jupiter. Now, at the time these texts came, and even to the present day, science cannot explain what the asteroid belt is and where it came from. So they depicted, for some reason known to them, Nibiru as a cross with a circle around it. And this is another symbol which comes up again and again, as we'll see, in the modern world within the symbolic language of the people that run the world today. This is another possibility, and indeed part of the reason the cross and the circle comes up again and again, as we'll see. I'll show some symbols, modern symbols in a minute, to back this up. What they did in the ancient world was that they took the circle, which was the cycle of the sun through the year, through the zodiac signs and through the 12 months, and they put a cross in the middle of it, which broke up into these seasons with the solstices and the equinoxes, etc. And they put the sun on the cross in the middle. And if you look in the ancient world, you can find at least 16 ancient god figures, most of which are said to have been born on December the 25th. Why? Because at this point, which is what we call Christmas, just before Christmas, that is the winter solstice, 21st, 22nd of December, when the sun, in symbolic language, reaches the bottom of its cycle. In their language, symbolically, the sun died. By 3 days later, 25th of December, the sun had demonstrably started its journey back into the height of its power in the sun. So they picked December the 25th as the time when the sun was born. The man who decided at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Roman emperor, that Jesus was born on December the 25th, didn't worship Jesus, he worshipped a god called Sol Invictus, which translates as the unconquered sun. And what they did in the ancient world is that they showed symbolically that the sun went through the year, and by the time it got to Easter, which was a fixed point then, it was entering the sign of the ram or the lamb, Aries. And they used to have ceremonies sacrificing lambs because they said the lamb would die so the sins of the people would be forgiven and they would have great returns in their crops and whatever. So when you go back, you start to see some of the things that have been weaved into belief systems in a very different light. And so if you look at that symbol, which comes up again and again at this time, the cross and the circle, you can start to see it coming up around. There's the Celtic cross. That's NATO, a wholly owned subsidiary of the global elite. Again and again this symbol comes up. That's on the British pound. That's the CIA symbol, the cross and the rays of the sun, which is what you see again and again, like that thing around the symbolic picture of Zoroaster. The eagle comes up again and again as part of their symbol. That has evolved out of the mythical bird of Egypt, the phoenix. There could be another reason for that too, which will have to be on another time when I've done more research into it. And this is what I found in the City of London just a few weeks ago. We're going to come to this as I go along, but the City of London is the epicenter of today's global manipulation and has been for many centuries. And this is across the road in the great financial district of London from St. Paul's Cathedral, in the heart, the epicenter of this. And that's on a financial building, and it's exactly the same stuff that you find in the ancient world. Indeed, apart from the cross, you can see this exactly the same as I've been looking at. And in the paintings, a lot of information has been symbolically passed on. This is a very simple example. Some of the paintings, particularly Renaissance paintings, carry incredibly detailed esoteric knowledge in the way that, in the symbols that they portray. But here's a simple example of what I'm talking about. This is a famous picture by Leonardo da Vinci, The Last Supper. Leonardo da Vinci was a high initiate of this secret society network, and he was funded by a family, a famous Venetian family, very powerful Venetian family called the de Medici family, that were also, of course, involved in this scam. And the de Medici family were the same family that funded Christopher Columbus. And that will become relevant as the night unfolds and we look to how this affects North America. So what has Leonardo da Vinci done here? As has been pointed out, he's symbolized Jesus as the Son, and he's broken up the 12 disciples into 4 sets of 3. Again, another symbolic way of portraying the same theme. And I have to say, some of the other paintings that I've come across, the esoteric stuff is really deep. According to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that book that was about various bloodlines and stuff and secret societies, they say that Leonardo da Vinci was actually a Grand Master of an elite secret society, very much still involved today, called the Priory of Sion. So, let's start making our way into the modern world here. It's interesting that this area of the world, from Egypt down through Palestine into what was Turkey today, what was Persia and Asia Minor, and then across into what is now Iraq, formerly Sumer, and Iran, and down to the Persian Gulf. This area, the Caucasus Mountains up here, has not only where these Anunnaki and their various types were supposed to be operating in the ancient world, first openly and then more behind the scenes. If you look at this same area of the world, every major religion has come out of that area of the world. And if anyone thinks the Hindu religion didn't, well, the Hindu religion and the Sanskrit language and the sacred books, the Vedas of the Hindu religion, they came as a result of an Aryan race coming out of the Caucasus Mountains and down into that area of the world 1,000 years old BC. And it's kind of interesting, when I've been researching this, again and again, in terms of bloodlines and stuff, the Caucasus Mountains area has come up again and again in terms of some kind of white race. And it's interesting, I don't know where it actually came from, but what do they call white people in America? They call them Caucasians. What a funny thing to call them. Except, when you start to get into this, this becomes very, very relevant indeed. Now, as I'm going to chart in detail in this book I'm writing, and nearly finished, but I can only summarize now, you can show very comfortably how the peoples of this area and those various bloodlines of various kinds actually became overwhelmingly the people of Europe. What happened was that they changed their name as they went across, and so we lose the plot. The Scythians became the Saka, Saki, Saxon, and eventually the Saxons. Another group down here, the Sumeri, through various changes in their name, became the Celts. And so, when you look at some of the classic expressions of culture up here, you start to realize where they came from. You know, in Ireland, the classic Irish symbol, the shamrock name came from North Africa. In Scotland, of course, it's the bagpipes, if you can stand hearing them. The bagpipes came from this same area. So you can follow these peoples out through and out into that area. And within these peoples were these bloodlines, and we'll come to that. The Lady Diana thing is very relevant to this, funny enough. But let me just pick up one example of what I'm talking about, which spans the time. There were a group of people, a race of people down here called the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians, or part of their hierarchy anyway, in the ancient world, moved to northern Italy and became the Venetians. The Venetians created a maritime and financial empire in that area that became very famous and very powerful. And their financial empire was based on what? It was based on lending people money that doesn't exist and charging them interest on it. Have I heard that somewhere before? and so it's amazing how this fits together as we go on here. So this empire went up into an area that became known as Lombardy. Now Lombard is still a word that's constantly used in the financial system. One of the most famous streets in the City of London financial district is called Lombard Street. Now what happened then is that these peoples, or representatives of them, and by this time they'd become known as the Black Nobility. The reason for this nickname was that while they were in Venice and that area, they started to invent aristocratic titles for themselves and take over titles that already existed. So they got this nickname, the Black Nobility. And the Black Nobility, or representatives of them, moved up through Germany and eventually settled in Holland and Amsterdam and became their epicenter. Now, while they were in Amsterdam, this is when the Dutch started settling South Africa. In 1688, one of this black nobility, called William of Orange, was manipulated onto the throne of England when he married Queen Mary. And then this whole crowd moved en bloc, the black nobility, and parked their epicenter in London. Now, this is interesting because of what followed this. One of the things that William of Orange did was sign the charter for the Bank of England. And what came out of this situation was the creation of the financial centre we call the City of London, which to this day is the epicenter, or one of them, of this global manipulation. Interestingly, in the years before William arrived, because these guys don't make it up as they go along, someone set fire to the old City of London. And as always, they need a patsy, don't they? They need a Lee Harvey Oswald. So they blame the fire, the Great Fire of London, on some guy burning the cakes in Pudding Lane. They torched it. Of course they torched it because they wanted a blank sheet of land on which they could build their new London, which was going to be the epicenter of their empire. And if you look at who designed and built the City of London, it's interesting to see their connections. Most famously, it was a guy called Sir Christopher Wren who designed St Paul's Cathedral in the heart of the City of London. Sir Christopher Wren was a high initiate of the secret society network. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. What else followed this black nobility from the Middle East and this area, parking themselves in London? We had the emergence of the Great British Empire. Now, when I was a kid, I could never work out how a group of islands that you can hardly see on the globe could have an empire that spanned the flipping world. Now I know. It wasn't the Great British Empire, it was the great empire of this group that had parked itself in London. They'd parked themselves somewhere else, it would have been the Great Dutch Empire. After they settled themselves in London, by the way, the English started settling South Africa and kicking the Dutch out. Now they're using the English people as pawns for their game rather than the Dutch as they did before. So what happened was, when the Great British Empire emerged, well, what was great about it, mind, and there was over in-your-face control, which always has a finite life. Because when you know you're under dictatorship, eventually the human desire for freedom will rebel against it.